How do you choose joy when your heart feels shattered into a million pieces? How do you hold on to hope when the pain is so deep it threatens to swallow you whole? Even the strongest among us, those who dedicate their lives to lifting others, are not spared from life's cruelest blows. Rick Warren, one of the most influential Christian leaders of our time, has inspired millions with his words of faith and purpose. Yet, behind the pulpit, he faced a heartbreak so devastating that it tested every truth he had ever preached. This is the story of a man who discovered that even in the darkest valleys, God's blessings can still break through. For decades, Rick Warren has been a guiding light for millions, offering hope, comfort, and faith to those walking through their darkest valleys. But now, the man who has spent a lifetime lifting others is facing an emotional and physical storm of his own, one so profound it has left countless followers stunned and heartbroken. The tragedy began with the unthinkable, the death of his own son by suicide. In the aftermath, Rick and his wife made a bold pledge, to break the silence and erase the shame surrounding mental illness, no matter the cost. Yet, as grief collided with health challenges and public scrutiny, Warren's unwavering faith was pushed to its breaking point. This is not just the story of a beloved pastor, it is the story of a father's deepest sorrow, a leader's most difficult trial, and a test of faith that may change his life's mission forever. In 2013, Rick Warren encountered a heartbreak so deep, no sermon, no scripture, and no lifetime of ministry could shield him from it, the tragic loss of his youngest son, Matthew. This was more than a personal loss, it was a shattering moment that ripped open the quiet, invisible battle so many families fight in silence, the agonizing crossroads where faith meets the harsh reality of mental illness. The news sent shockwaves through his congregation and across the globe, forcing a conversation the church had too often avoided. Matthew Warren was not defined by his struggles. He was bright, thoughtful, and carried a rare depth of compassion. Friends and family recall his ability to sense pain in others instantly, often stepping in to comfort those who were hurting long before they asked for help. But behind that kindness lived a storm that few could truly see, a relentless darkness he fought with courage until his final day. And for Rick Warren, that loss became a turning point, one that would forever transform his mission, his ministry, and the way he spoke to the world about pain, hope, and healing. Beneath that kindness lay a shadow that few could perceive. Matthew battled chronic and debilitating mental health issues, particularly depression and thoughts of self-harm. His struggle began early and grew more intense during his teenage years, testing every bit of strength the Warren family possessed. As parents, Rick and Kay Warren did everything they could. They poured their resources into therapies, treatments, spiritual guidance, medical assistance, and countless prayers. However, love and their leadership experience could not prepare them for the profound helplessness of witnessing their son in pain. Rick, the same individual who authored The Purpose-Driven Life and led one of America's largest churches, now confronted perhaps the most significant challenge of his life. Standing by as his child lost the battle against silence and secrecy. Then came April 5, 2013. At only 27 years old, Matthew Warren took his own life. The news sent shockwaves through the Saddleback Church community and the broader Christian world. People were in disbelief. The author who had guided so many to find meaning and purpose had lost his own son to despair. This tragedy sparked a wave of grief and questions. How could this happen to someone so faithful? How could a family that preached hope be confronted with such darkness? In their letter to the church, Rick and Kay Warren expressed, "No words can convey the deep anguish we feel at this moment. Our youngest son, Matthew, was an incredibly kind, gentle, and compassionate young man. Yet, with his lifelong struggle against mental illness, the dark depths of depression, and sorrowful thoughts, this was truly a rare and raw confession from a public figure, resonating deeply with thousands who quietly endure the same tormented emotions." Rick Warren, however, did not back down. He chose openness over secrecy and strode into the flames. He and Kay went on to become church mental health champions, saying that sadness and faith are incompatible. The cause of Matthew's death grew well beyond individual grief. The specific goal of eliminating the stigma associated with mental illness in Christian communities. The pair also launched an outreach initiative at Saddleback Church in 2014 called Hope for Mental Health. The message is that mental illness does affect religious people. Instead of stigmatizing these individuals, the church must be willing to have frank conversations and show them compassion. Many churches have been ignoring or oversimplifying the issue for decades. Why pray, after all, if there is nothing at its center, was a common assumption. Rick has never been afraid to be skeptical. Some people wonder how the guy who had spent so much time preaching hope was unable to save his son. Some people refer to it as the son's lack of faith. Warren, however, responded in a way that mostly silenced the critics. Why didn't God heal Matthew, many wonder. I respond that he did, but not during this lifetime. The world heard that one sentence, which was a father's anguish expressed with deep spiritual clarity. Millions of people's perspectives on the relationship between faith and mental illness were completely changed by it. It was the start of Rick Warren's never-ending quest to make sure that no family ever has to endure the same kind of loneliness as his own. Rick Warren was already experiencing another pain as he recovered from the previous one. This time for the powerful body and heart. A body disintegrating. People are altered by grief. However, Rick Warren's grief over the death of his son was just the start. His body started betraying him in surprising and frightening ways just a few years after he had experienced the most devastating heartbreak of his life. The guy who had previously traveled the world, delivered feeble sermons to thousands of people, and embodied the spirit of a spiritual movement was now imprisoned by an uncooperative body. Muscle spasms that initially appeared innocuous were the first signs. Then the acute, erratic, and uncontrollable tremors began. Warren started to suffer from severe insomnia, frequently going for several nights without getting any sleep at all. His days turned into an agonizing haze of mental disarray and physical fatigue. Initially, medical professionals had a hard time identifying the issue. The symptoms were unusual, uncommon, and didn't appear to be recurring. But weariness wasn't the only issue. Rick Warren's body was breaking down, and no one knew why. Doctors eventually gave the diagnosis following a series of examinations and testing. Spinal myopathy. The majority of people have never ever heard of this extremely uncommon neurological condition. It results in abrupt, involuntary muscle jerking that frequently happens without warning. These spasms weren't just unpleasant for Warren. They hurt like hell. His movement, focus, and, most tragically, his sleep were all affected by the illness. However, it didn't stop there. The experts discovered a second, more intriguing issue as a result of the excavations. An unusual neurological disorder that the doctors would later name Warren syndrome. Rick felt as though his body was unable to adequately handle the adrenaline because his brain was working too quickly. This resulted in an ongoing condition of overstimulation, which was followed by debilitating episodes of internal agony and mental bewilderment. Try speaking to thousands of people, leading your team, or preaching when your nervous system is fighting back. Rick Warren compared it to being imprisoned in a body where everything seemed to be running constantly, even when you stopped to catch your breath. He had trouble sleeping most of the time. His body and mind were more disoriented when he woke up. Pain for 24 hours. He was a sickly, harsh man who lived for purpose and leadership. It was the third blow. An autoimmune disease. Warren claimed that in 2022, his immune system started to attack his muscles, causing excruciating discomfort in every part of his body. It hurt to move. In contrast to so many other health problems, there was only management and survival, no actual treatment or well-defined path to recovery. When sorrow, illness, and intense, suffocating exhaustion met, the intolerable reality surfaced. Saddleback Church could no longer be led by Rick Warren. In 2021, he announced his resignation as senior pastor after more than 40 years of service at one of the biggest churches in America. For any man, the decision was not simple. For a man who had dedicated his adult life to one mission, it was agonizing. Warren seemed to indicate that giving up was no longer an option. It has to do with how things transpired. I must pay attention to my body, he remarked. I will be unable to help anyone if I continue to push. Not God, not my family, nor my church. The Christian community was taken aback. Pastor Rick Warren was more than that. He was a force. During some of the most turbulent decades in the church's history, he had been a voice of leadership, reason, and hope. It was like witnessing a lighthouse go out when he stepped down. But aging wasn't the only issue. All-consuming pain was the only way to describe the forced surrender that resulted from it. Warren remained silent, but his departure made a strong statement. Leaders are not immune to bleeding. Rest is necessary for even the strongest. And letting go is sometimes the most faithful thing a person can do. Rick Warren was thrown into another firestorm as soon as the dust cooled. This time, the Spirit was questioning all he believed in. Faith in the face of opposition. Biblical conviction and cultural relevance have always been delicately balanced by Rick Warren. However, that delicate balancing act has been closely examined in recent years. As his health deteriorated and sadly church leadership changed, a fresh round of debate erupted around the core of his public persona. Despite his reputation for uniting people, Rick Warren finds himself at the epicenter of religious controversies. Accused of making concessions, chastised for his decisions, and even made fun of by people who once thought highly of him. In 2023, the first public explosion occurred when the Saddleback Church was formally expelled by the Southern Baptist Convention, SBC, from its constituents. Why? The Church of Rick Warren had ordained. SBC leaders saw the appointment of 3 women as pastors as a transgression of their doctrine, which assigns men to pastoral positions. The fact that Sadleach had developed into one of the most significant churches globally under Warren's direction. The denomination was unwilling to accept the practice of ordaining women because it went too far. Warren personally pleaded for the cause of unity and the common mission at the SBC's annual convention. He cited Saddleback's dedication to Scripture and its sending out of ministries. It wasn't enough previously. The appeal was turned down. For the first time in decades, Warren was now openly separated from that specific communion. While some applauded this choice, others shed tears. For Rick, however, it was a great personal loss, akin to having your own family reject you. Anyone's faith would have been challenged by such a scandal. Warren continued to tear down the walls, nevertheless. He made headlines once more in February 2025 with a single tweet. Jesus was crucified in the center of 2 other people, one on each side. He is in the middle, not on either side, if you're searching for the hashtag genuine Jesus and not a partisan caricature. The purpose of the John 19:18 quoting tweet was to warn Christians not to be so radical and to signal some political balance, but it caused a significant response of criticism. His detractors came from a wide range of theological backgrounds. Others mocked his scriptural interpretation as shameful and deceptive, while others accused him of diluting the message to appeal to the society. Warren was besieged by conservative leaders, influential people, and even theologians who accused him of creating a tepid Jesus who represented nothing. The tweets weren't the only thing. Many saw it as a protracted set of concessions that sacrificed biblical truth for popular favor. He was accused of straying from the central message of the gospel because of his interfaith activities, global projects, and readiness to engage with leaders from all parties. Warren, however, had a definite stance. His message was one of spiritual integrity rather than political neutrality. Jesus was not a partisan, and to limit him to that would be to miss the point completely. However, the harm was already done. This is a cautionary tale of a man who was previously thought to be a uniator between denominations. Throughout his life, Rick Warren preached about purpose, togetherness, and hope. He is still unaffected in his mission, nevertheless. He maintained that just as the church must be able to fight for truth without abandoning love, it must also be able to interact with culture without becoming a part of it. Deeper, Hidden familial traumas were developing, which few people were aware of until recently, while public outrage raged. Reaction to a tweet on the Bible. One sentence can start a firestorm in the social media age. And when Rick Warren wrote a tweet that was supposed to be unifying but instead sparked a barrage of criticism that few anticipated, that's exactly what occurred. This incident turned out to be one of the most surprisingly contentious periods in his public life for a guy whose legacy had been based on biblical teaching and common sense. A contemplation on John 19 verse 18 was tweeted by Rick Warren on February 11, 2025. Jesus' crucifixion between two thieves is described in this passage. The men on either side were robbers, and the tweet said, they crucified Jesus with two others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Jesus is in the middle, not on either side, if you're searching for the #real Jesus rather than a partisan caricature. It appeared to be a straightforward appeal for humility, unity, and the rejection of hyperpartisan politics. Warren cited Jesus' spiritual stance, which went beyond political allegiances and was neither pro-left nor pro-right. But the expected resonance of the message had not been achieved. The tweet became viral in a matter of hours, not because of its content but rather because critics claimed it presented a faulty and even dangerous interpretation of the Bible. It was swiftly condemned by well-known Christians. The Babylon Bee's managing editor, Joel Berry, made fun of the post on Twitter. You should also include that the thief on the right is the one who went to paradise if you're going to misrepresent the story this badly, lol. Others called Warren's post shameful and charged him of misquoting the Bible to further his political agenda. Prominent expository preacher Justin Peters referred to it as a breach of fundamental biblical interpretation. On the first day, biblical hermeneutics would have laughed this off. He and other critics contended that the passage is descriptive rather than symbolic and that it was a flagrant misuse of the author's meaning to infer political neutrality from the fact that Jesus' cross is at the middle. Criticism soon became personal and vile. Former Trump legal advisor and conservative commentator Jenna Ellis didn't mince words. When it comes to truth, Jesus is neither moderate nor in the center. The attempt to define him that way based on where his cross is located is nothing less than transforming a historical fact into significant symbolism in order to further your ideological agenda, she tweeted. She wasn't by herself, either. It's so bad my jaw is on the floor, Megan Basham, a reporter for the Daily Wire, observed. Former followers started to question whether Rick Warren's once balanced voice had become, in their words, politically sanitized after theology professor Aaron Edwards accused Warren of teaching a culturally shaped Jesus that was only partially whole. They saw Warren's exhortation to seek Jesus in the midst as merely a flight from moral clarity. A refusal to oppose what they see to be serious and genuine moral and cultural dangers. Was this, however, the case? Rick Warren didn't move. He didn't take down the tweet or issue a lengthy apology. Rather, Warren left the phrases in place, presuming that the message was worthy of being delivered with indifference. Since Jesus was never a political figure, he was neither Republican nor Democrat. Rather than serving as a convenient means of resolving disputes, this message served as a reminder that the Son of God never contained himself inside human ambitions. However, this was only the tip of the iceberg. Throughout, he stressed unity. However, if ideologies become more divided, one person's unity could be interpreted as treachery. It was criticized for many reasons than only its theology. It was over its timing, its tribalism, and the need for ferocious black-and-white solutions in a world that was broken and murky. Although it may have caused pain, the public was also made aware of Rick Warren's true nature. One who wants to say harsh words when things get tough. One thing was clear whether they liked his rendition or not. The church was once again pushed to consider its true beliefs about Jesus, politics, and the liminal area by Rick Warren. A deeper grief emerged as the headlines circulated, revealing the Warren family's crumbling and the real cost of leadership and loss. A grieving family. Rick Warren weathered a storm no parent should ever have to go through, long before the news headlines and the scandals, long before the internet debated over tweets and theology. As a preacher, best-selling author, and man of unwavering purpose, he was well known to the public. Behind the scenes, however, Rick Warren was a very different person. A father in mourning, devastated by the death of his youngest son. After a prolonged struggle with mental illness, Rick and Kay Warren's 27-year-old son, Matthew Warren, took his own life on April 5, 2013, shattering their lives. Matthew might have looked like any other young man to the outside world. He was quiet, kind, and smart, but few people knew that he battled darkness inside. He experienced tremendous anxiety, sadness, and thoughts of self-harm from an early age, which no amount of treatment, love, or prayer could ever end. Kay and Rick had taken every possible parental action. They prayed constantly and located the best medical professionals. They offered a lot of assistance. Matthew was a cherished youngster. He had a deep affection for Jesus. However, the sickness lingered on him like an enduring shadow. The Warren family was aware of it and dealt with it on a daily basis. However, when the final blow struck, it not only destroyed them but also revealed a cruel silence in the global church on mental health and a lack of understanding and empathy for it. There are no words to describe the excruciating agony we are experiencing at the moment. The Warrens wrote, "Matthew, our youngest son, was a very kind, and caring young man. Although he was born with mental illness, dark holes of depression, and melancholy thoughts, he had a brilliant mind and a gift for making people laugh." The tragedy sparked a national conversation, to which some responded with love and compassion and others, in a very unsettling turn, with judgment. Perhaps the most terrible question of all was why Rick Warren's faith failed to save Matthew. In a very honest but profound way, Warren answered, "People ask me why God did not heal Matthew. How could a man who preached hope lose his son to despair? How could a family that built one of the most famous churches in the world not save their own? He did, but not this side of forever, I assure them." Rick and Kay decided to speak out about mental health awareness instead of hiding their pain, especially in churches where the issue is too often ignored or shamed. That one sentence changed the way many Christians started to think about grief, faith, and mental illness. It was not belief that let go of Matthew, rather, it was a sickness that, like any other, does not discriminate even against the most devout. Their mission was wonderfully simple: make churches safe havens for those who are struggling. No stigma, no shame, just help, hope, and love. They launched the Hope for Mental Health initiative through Saddleback Church in 2014. Their daughter, Amy Warren Hilliker, later talked about how Matthew's death affected the entire family. By then, the family was out in public ministering to millions, but in private they were just about holding together, and their survival was to redeem suffering. She described the family home as an underground bunker where trauma, illness, and grief quietly infiltrated their private world, while Matthew suffered and Amy battled an unidentified chronic illness. Rick Warren never backed down, even during his darkest moments. Instead, he spoke about his son, led from his wounds, and showed the world that even pastors bleed. His ministry soon faced a new challenge that called into question his role in the Christian world, the controversies that surrounded the church. Even though Rick Warren is frequently hailed as one of the most significant spiritual voices of the 21st century, his path has not been without turbulence, particularly when his beliefs spilled out of the sanctuary and into the public square. For a religious man who established a reputation for inclusivity, purpose, and overcoming barriers, Rick Warren has frequently found himself in the crossfire of cultural conflicts. Perhaps one of the most talked about controversies was his 2008 decision to accept President Barack Obama's invitation to deliver the invocation at his presidential inauguration, which surprised both liberals and conservatives. Some were triggered by his own words, while others were sparked by interpretations and expectations that were well beyond his control. Proponents of LGBTQ+ rights saw Warren as hostile to their rights and were incensed that someone with those views would play such a central role in the inauguration of a president they believed stood for equality. The decision was criticized by progressives because Warren had openly supported Proposition 8, the California ballot initiative that sought to define marriage as between one man and one woman. Likewise, a number of the conservatives, especially from within the evangelical circles, were somewhat baffled by Warren's willingness to be visible with one of these, one whose coverage schedule ran counter to at least one that could reasonably be understood as traditional Christian teaching. But then this turned into a choice that Warren without difficulty defended. He believed in civil discourse and unity. Yet that changed into a second marked by means of a deep tension. Ought a pastor certainly live within the midst of American political existence without being torn through it? Intensity began to intensify in the years 2011 and 2012. At a time while global tensions rose and non-secular identities became more politicized, Warren's bridge-building efforts had been fiercely resisted. He attended interfaith meetings and spoke approximately the want for specific religions to come together to confront humanitarian crises. Slamming him had been fellow evangelicals accusing him of watering down the gospel or promoting a syncretism, a mixing of faiths which they noticed to be incompatible with Scripture. The cooperations and friendships with human beings of other faiths, he stated, should never be construed as turning against Christian doctrines, but rather as an embodiment of Christ's love. The lines among compassion and compromise had all started to blur. The controversy endured into the 12 months 2023 while Saddleback Church under Warren's legacy became formally expelled from the Southern Baptist Conference. The cause referred to for the Southern Baptist Convention's line of motion turned into that the ordination of woman pastors become a gross violation of the convention standards of doctrine. Although Warren had no longer been in senior pastorate position by using then, it changed into nevertheless a completely private rely. Saddleback turned into his existence. His reaction at the SBC annual assembly was bloodless but heartfelt. This is not about theology. This is about manage. He raised his voice for inclusivity and requested, why can't half of the church populace women be fully empowered to steer, the difficulty become no longer most effective instructional. It goes to the heart of Dr. Warren's philosophy of ministry, the equipping of each man and women to satisfy their God-given functions. Amid cultural storms and public backlash, Rick Warren confronted a deeper private conflict. One religion and repute could not protect him from stepping down, however now not out. After extra than 4 decades of leadership, boom, international influence, and inconceivable personal loss, Rick Warren faced a crossroads. This time now not born of controversy, public opinion, or theological debate, however of something even more private. His health. For years, Rick had been the unwavering presence on the center of Saddleback Church. His messages formed lives. His books sold tens of millions. His vision constructed a ministry that stretched across continents. However, backstage, Warren's frame becomes sending him a message no sermon could silence. In 2021, Rick Warren revealed something that shocked a lot of his followers. He changed into laid low with spinalise, an extraordinary neurological disorder that reasons unexpected uncontrollable muscle spasms. In contrast to ordinary twitches or tremors, these spasms were severe, often painful, completely unpredictable, and that was just a part of it. The spasms additionally interfered with Warren's potential to sleep. There were nights, a lot of them whilst he wouldn't sleep in any respect. His frame held hostage with the aid of consistent nerve indicators. The health problems have been past that. Warren also made the disclosure of a mind condition known most effective by the uncommon name. A circumstance which in line with his doctors has considering that been dubbed Warren syndrome. A disorder wherein the frame needs assist in processing adrenaline. The ensuing spin-offs in his case protected tremors, disorientation, pain, and an amazing feeling that the brain became racing all the time. Simply while you thought that changed into enough, he became diagnosed with another autoimmune disorder in 2022. A painful one bad soul which stored him in constant agony 24 hours a day, 7 days per week. For this reason, every second of his lifestyles paid heavy tolls because of the ceaseless onslaught upon his health. This became greater than a bodily conflict for a person whose identification had been shaped by cause, management, and stamina. It became a take a look at of spirituality. In June 2021, Warren made an emotional and brave assertion that he could be stepping down as senior pastor of Saddleback Church. For many, it changed into as if the stop of an technology had come. He commenced from scratch, constructing Saddleback from a small residing room in Orange County, returned in 1980 with most effective a handful of families and no real economic backing. Over the years, that little home collecting grew into considered one of the United States' biggest and maximum influential churches. To think about it, without Rick Warren turned into something many couldn't even fathom. But to Warren, it became no longer in finishing. It turned into transition, a relay to the following technology of leaders as he pursues larger ministry goals. In the year 2022, he ceremoniously passed over the baton as senior pastor to lots more youthful enthusiastic Pastor Andy Wood from Northern California and stored the honorary Identify founding pastor to himself. Bittersweet without a doubt, due to the fact that congregation members, most of whom got here to religion via the lens of Warren's words, witnessed and shed tears over the approaching. He did now not disappear from the scene. Pretty the opposite, Rick Warren leaned into global missions paintings as an government director of completing the task. He saved mentoring young pastors, speak me to audiences worldwide, writing and advocating for the intellectual health movement in ministry innovation. What do you believe you studied? Will Rick Warren upward thrust above this heartbreak once more? Or has his journey taken an everlasting flip? Remark underneath, like this video, and subscribe for more in-intensity tales like this one. And don't omit the subsequent video. There's loads extra to discover.